My grandmother had not spoken a complete sentence in almost 2 years. Then my husband walked into her room. She looked straight at him, grabbed his wrist with a strength I didn't know she still had, and whispered one word: Daniel. My husband froze. His name was Mark. I laughed nervously and told Grandma she was confused, but she tightened her fingers around his wrist. Then she said something that made Mark stop breathing. You promised me you'd never come back. That night, while Mark was asleep, I searched the name Daniel in my grandmother's old papers. I found a photograph taken in 1987. The man standing beside her looked exactly like my husband, and on the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, were 6 words: Daniel Reed. He doesn't know yet. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 42 when my grandmother called my husband by another man's name. Until that afternoon, I thought I understood my family. I was wrong. My husband, Mark Reed, was 45. We had been married for 14 years. He was patient, dependable, and almost painfully private. He worked in commercial insurance, remembered everyone's birthday, and hated being photographed. That last part had always seemed like a harmless quirk. Now it didn't. Mark's weakness was avoidance. If something frightened him, he didn't lie exactly. He simply became very skilled at discussing everything except the thing that mattered. My grandmother, Evelyn, was 91. She had raised me almost as much as my mother had. She taught me to bake, balance a checkbook, and never buy furniture you couldn't lift one end of yourself. Age had taken pieces of her gradually. First names, then dates, then entire conversations. But one thing remained strangely sharp: faces. That Sunday, Mom and I were visiting her assisted living facility when Mark arrived carrying the cardigan Grandma had left at our house. The moment he entered, she changed. Her eyes widened. The blanket slipped from her hands. Daniel, Mark stopped. Mom looked at me. Who's Daniel? I shrugged. Grandma, this is Mark. Grandma stared at him. No. Mark gave a small smile. It's okay. Then Grandma grabbed him. You promised me you'd never come back. Mark pulled his wrist away, too quickly. On the drive home, I asked, Who's Daniel? No idea. You look terrified. I was startled. She recognized you. She's 91, Claire. I turned toward the window. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. But for the first time in 14 years, his touch felt like evidence. My mother, Susan, dismissed the whole thing. Your grandmother confused him with someone. Someone named Daniel. Yes. Who? Mom started reorganizing the fruit bowl. That was her weakness. She managed anxiety by controlling insignificant things. Mom, I don't remember every person Grandma knew. She moved an apple, then moved it back. She was lying. I knew because I had inherited the same habit. The next afternoon, I went to Grandma's old house. Mom had been slowly clearing it since Grandma moved into assisted living. In the bedroom closet were 12 photo albums and 3 cardboard boxes. I searched for Daniel. Nothing. Then I found an envelope marked 1987. Inside were 6 photographs. The 4th made me sit on the floor. Grandma stood outside a diner beside a man in his late 20s, tall, dark hair, deep-set eyes, a slight bend in his left eyebrow. Mark had the same bend. The resemblance wasn't close, it was disturbing. The man could have been Mark's older brother, or Mark himself, photographed decades before we met. On the back, Daniel Reed, October 1987. Same last name. I turned over the next photograph. Grandma was handing Daniel an envelope. Behind them stood a woman I recognized, my mother. She was 23 and pregnant with me. I stared at her stomach, then at Daniel. A thought arrived so ugly that I tried to reject it. What if Daniel was my father? And what if my husband was related to him? I checked the final photograph. On the back, Grandma had written, "He doesn't know yet." Suddenly, I wasn't wondering whether Mark had hidden something from me. I was wondering whether our entire marriage had been a mistake nobody had discovered. I drove straight to Mom's house. I put the photograph on her kitchen table. She stared at it, then sat down. "Who is Daniel Reed? Where did you find this?" It was exactly the wrong answer. "Who is he?" Mom rubbed both hands together. "I haven't heard that name in 35 years. Was he my father?" Her head snapped up. No. The speed of the answer reassured me. For about 3 seconds. "Then why were you pregnant in a photograph with him?" "Because people can stand near pregnant women without impregnating them." Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. I didn't. "Why does he look like Mark?" Mom looked at the photograph again. "He does." "You never noticed?" "I never met Mark's family." That was true. Mark's mother died before we met. His father, according to Mark, left when he was a child and died years later. I pointed to Daniel's surname. "Reed." Mom went silent. "Mark's surname is Reed." "I know." "Mom, look at me." She did. "Did you know Mark was connected to this man when I married him?" No. I believed her. Then I asked the question that mattered. What did Grandma mean by, "He doesn't know yet"? Mom closed her eyes. "Daniel had a son." The room seemed to shrink. "How old?" "I don't know exactly." "Would he be around Mark's age?" She didn't answer. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "Oh my God. Claire, is Mark Daniel's son?" "I don't know." "And if Daniel was connected to our family, he wasn't your father. But what was he?" Mom looked toward the window. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible. "The man your grandmother blamed for your grandfather's death." And suddenly, the mystery became something darker than blood. My grandfather, Thomas Bennett, died in 1987. I had always known that. I had also always been told it was a car accident. That part was true. The rest wasn't. Thomas owned a small construction company with his younger brother, Robert. Daniel Reed worked for them as a bookkeeper. One October night, Thomas drove home from a job site and went off a rural bridge. Police found alcohol in his blood. The family was devastated. Grandma was furious. My father wasn't a drinker, Mom said, but he had alcohol in his blood. Yes. Then what did Daniel have to do with it? Mom hesitated. Daniel was with him that evening. According to Daniel, Thomas had been drinking after discovering money missing from the company. Daniel offered to drive him home. Thomas refused. Hours later, he was dead. Why did Grandma blame Daniel? Because Daniel disappeared the next morning. I felt cold. Disappeared? Quit his job, left town. And nobody thought that was suspicious? Of course they did. But no charges were filed. There was no evidence Daniel caused the crash. Still, Grandma never forgave him. Then I remembered the photograph. Grandma standing beside Daniel after Thomas's death, handing him an envelope. You said she hated him. She did. Then why was she meeting him? Mom looked confused. I didn't know she had. Another secret, another contradiction. Then my phone rang. Mark. I watched his name on the screen. For the first time, I didn't answer. Because I had started wondering whether Mark already knew exactly who Daniel Reed was. Mark came home at 7. Why didn't you answer? I was with Mom. He noticed the photograph on the counter. His face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Who's that? You tell me. He picked it up. I don't know. He's Daniel Reed. Mark put the photograph down. I watched his fingers. They were trembling. You know that name? No. Don't. Claire. My grandmother calls you Daniel. I find a photograph of Daniel Reed, who looks exactly like you, and you expect me to believe you've never heard the name? His jaw tightened. I haven't. I wanted to believe him. Then he made a mistake. He walked upstairs, not toward our bedroom, toward his office. I followed. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, a drawer I had never seen open. Inside was an old birth certificate. Mark handed it to me. Father. Unknown. Mother. Janet Reed. You told me your father abandoned you. That's what my mother told me. Then why is he listed as unknown? I found this after she died. When? 6 years ago? 6 years. He had known something was wrong for 6 years and said nothing. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know what it meant. You could have asked. I was afraid of the answer. There was Mark's weakness again, avoidance. He had spent 6 years protecting himself from a question. Now the question had entered our marriage. Do you think Daniel Reed was your father? Mark looked at the photograph. Yes. My stomach dropped. Then he said, but there's something else. From the drawer, he removed a sealed envelope. On the front was my grandmother's name, Evelyn Bennett, and in the corner was a return address belonging to Mark's mother, dated 1998. Grandma had known Mark's mother 11 years before Mark and I ever met. The envelope was still sealed. How did you get this? I found it in my mother's things. Why didn't you open it? It wasn't addressed to me. I almost screamed. You've had this for 6 years? Yes. And my grandmother's name is on it? Yes. And you never thought maybe you should mention that to your wife, whose grandmother she is? I thought it was coincidence. Mark, your mother wrote to my grandmother. I know how it looks. No, you know how it is. I tore the envelope open. Mark didn't stop me. Inside was a single page. Dear Evelyn, I kept my promise. Mark knows nothing about Daniel or Thomas. I never told him why Daniel left us, but he is asking questions now. I don't know how much longer I can protect him from what his father did. Janet. My hands went numb. Mark read it twice. What his father did. Neither of us spoke. Then I remembered Grandma's words. You promised me you'd never come back. Had she confused Mark with Daniel because Mark looked like him? If Daniel was Mark's father, the explanation suddenly seemed obvious, but the implication was horrifying. My husband might be the son of the man my grandmother believed responsible for her husband's death. Mark sat down. I need to know. For once, he wasn't avoiding anything. The next morning, we went to see Grandma together. Grandma was lucid when we arrived. I showed her Daniel's photograph. She pushed it away. Bad man. Grandma, was Daniel Mark's father? She looked at Mark. Her expression softened. Not your fault, Mark swallowed. What did my father do? Grandma shook her head. Thomas trusted him. Did Daniel kill Grandpa? Her eyes sharpened. No. That surprised me. Then why did you hate him? Grandma looked at me. Because he let Thomas take the blame. I leaned closer. For what? She struggled for the word. Money. The missing money. Grandpa had supposedly discovered money missing from his company before his death. Daniel stole it? Grandma shook her head again. No. Then who? She raised one trembling finger. For a second, I thought she was pointing at Mark. Then I realized she was pointing past him, at the photograph in my hand, not at Daniel, at someone standing partly behind Daniel, my mother. I felt sick. Mom! Grandma became agitated. No, no, Susan didn't. Her breathing accelerated. A nurse entered and asked us to stop. As we left, Mark said nothing. Neither did I, because the photograph now contained another possibility. My mother had been 23, pregnant, and somehow connected to missing money and a dead father. What had Grandma spent 39 years protecting her from? Mom broke when I told her what Grandma said, not immediately. First, she denied everything. Then she cried. Finally, she walked to a cabinet and removed an old ledger. I stole the money. I stared at her. How much? $18,000. In 1987, that was enough to destroy a small company. Why? She pressed both hands against her face. Your father. My biological father, David Bennett, was not the stable young husband I had imagined. He had a gambling problem. He owed dangerous people money. Mom stole from her father's company to pay part of the debt. She planned to replace it. Grandpa discovered the missing funds. He assumed Daniel had taken them because Daniel managed the books. That night, Daniel admitted something else. He had been covering smaller accounting errors for months, not theft, but enough to make him look guilty. Did Grandpa know you took the money? Not when he left. Was he drinking? Mom shook her head. Daniel was. Everything changed. Daniel had been drinking heavily. Grandpa took Daniel's car keys. Daniel, ashamed and angry, told him to drive himself if he thought he was so perfect. Grandpa left. He crashed. The alcohol found in his blood? Mom looked at me. The original report was wrong. A mislabeled sample was corrected days later. Grandpa had been sober. The correction never mattered to the family because he was already dead. Why did Daniel disappear? Because Grandma gave him money and told him to go. The photograph? The envelope? Grandma wasn't paying Daniel to hide his guilt. She was paying him to disappear before police examined the company records closely enough to discover Mom's theft. Grandma had protected her daughter. Daniel had accepted the blame, and Mark had inherited the shame. But one question remained. Why would Daniel agree to destroy his own reputation for my mother? Mom looked at me. Because the money wasn't the only secret. Daniel had been in love with my mother, not an affair. Not exactly. Mom was married and pregnant with me. But Daniel loved her, she knew. And when she stole the money, Daniel discovered it before Grandpa did. Instead of reporting her, he altered the bookkeeping to delay discovery. His weakness was loyalty without boundaries. He thought protecting someone meant helping them hide what they had done. When Grandpa confronted him, Daniel refused to expose Mom. Hours later, Grandpa died. Afterward, Grandma learned everything. She had two choices: tell the police and potentially send her pregnant daughter to prison, or let Daniel leave town carrying suspicion that could never be proven. She chose her daughter. Daniel chose silence. My mother chose to let him, and that was her weakness. Fear. She allowed an innocent man to carry a shadow because telling the truth might destroy her life. Did Daniel know he had a son? Mom nodded. Janet was pregnant when he left. Why didn't he take them? Grandma made him promise never to contact our family again. Janet refused to follow him. Mark stared at my mother. So my father lost his family protecting you? Mom began crying. Yes, I expected Mark to yell. He didn't. That was worse. He simply stood. Where is he? Mom looked at Grandma's old ledger. I don't know. Then she added, but your grandmother does. Grandma had kept one address for 39 years. Daniel Reed, Portsmouth, Maine. We found it inside her Bible, underneath the address she had written. I was wrong to ask this of him. Mark wanted to drive there immediately. I was afraid, not because of Daniel, because I could see what this was doing to my husband. For years, Mark had believed his father abandoned him. Then he believed his father might have caused a death. Now he was discovering that the man may have sacrificed his reputation to protect my mother. Every version of his childhood was collapsing. We drove north. The address belonged to a small blue house near the water. An elderly man answered. He was 73. The resemblance to Mark was unmistakable. Mark couldn't speak. Daniel looked at him for a long time. Then he said, Janet always said you had my eyes. Mark's face broke. You knew about me? Yes. Then why didn't you come? Daniel looked down. Because I promised Evelyn. You chose a promise over your son? Yes. The answer was brutal because it contained no excuse. Daniel's weakness had not changed. He confused punishment with responsibility. I thought staying away was the price I owed. For what? For helping Susan hide the theft, for letting Thomas leave angry, for being a coward when I should have told the truth. Mark's hands curled into fists. You could have written. I did. What? Every birthday. Daniel walked into another room. He returned carrying a wooden box. Inside were 39 unopened birthday cards, all addressed to Mark, none mailed. Mark picked up the first. For my son on his 6th birthday, then the 10th, the 18th, the 21st, 30, 40. Mark sat down. You wrote all these? Yes. Why didn't you send them? Because writing made me feel like your father. Sending them would have required me to act like one. That sentence destroyed whatever anger Mark had prepared, but Daniel wasn't finished. There's something Evelyn never told you. He looked at me. Your grandfather's death wasn't the reason she made me leave. Daniel opened an old folder. Inside was a copy of a letter signed by Grandma. She had not simply asked Daniel to leave. She had asked him to take legal responsibility for the missing money if investigators ever reopened the company accounts. Why? I whispered. To protect Susan. My mother. Daniel agreed, but there was a condition. If Grandma ever believed Susan was safe from prosecution, she would tell Mark the truth about his father. She never did. Why not? Daniel gave a sad smile. Because secrets get harder to confess the longer they work. Grandma's weakness had been love without fairness. She protected her daughter so fiercely that she allowed another woman's child to grow up believing his father didn't want him. That was why she reacted when Mark entered her room. Not because dementia had confused him with Daniel. For one moment, her failing mind had collapsed 39 years into a single face. You promised me you'd never come back. She wasn't afraid of Daniel returning. She was remembering the sentence she had said to him when she sent him away. But there was still something wrong. Why did Grandma say Daniel to Mark instead of recognizing him? Daniel looked surprised. She had seen Mark before. Mark turned. What? Daniel nodded. Evelyn came here 12 years ago. She had a photograph of your wedding. My skin prickled. She knew Mark was your son? Yes. Before or after we married? Before. The room went silent. My grandmother knew who Mark was before I married him, and she said nothing. That revelation hurt more than everything else. Why would she let me marry him without telling me? Daniel stared at me. Because she came here to stop the wedding. Grandma had found Mark's name on our wedding invitation. Reed. She remembered Janet's son. She tracked Daniel down because she feared something terrible. Not that Mark and I were related. We weren't. She feared Daniel had deliberately sent his son into our family for revenge. Daniel laughed bitterly when she accused him. He hadn't spoken to Mark in decades. He didn't even know Mark was marrying me. Grandma realized our relationship was coincidence. Then Daniel asked her one question. Does Claire love him? Grandma said yes. Does he love her? Yes. Then don't punish them for what we did. Grandma returned home. She never told us. For 12 years, she watched Mark at Christmas dinners, birthdays, anniversaries. She watched the son of the man she had exiled become part of the family she had supposedly protected. And slowly, something changed. She loved him, not because he was Daniel's son, because he was Mark. He repaired her porch, drove her to appointments, called every Sunday, sat beside her after she stopped remembering why he was there. The man she once feared as revenge became the grandson she had never expected. Then Daniel handed me one final envelope. She mailed this to me 3 months ago. Grandma's handwriting was shaky. Daniel, I was wrong. I told myself I protected Susan because she was my daughter. The truth is, I protected myself because I could not survive losing my husband and my daughter in the same year. You paid for Susan's mistake. Janet paid for yours. Mark paid for mine. That is too many people paying for one frightened girl's decision. I should have told him years ago. If I lose the courage again, tell him for me. And then came the line that made Mark cover his face with both hands. He became the kind of man I once hoped you would be. Please don't make him inherit our silence. We returned to Grandma 3 days later. Daniel came with us. Mom was there too. 4 people carrying 39 years of the same secret stood around one frail woman who could barely remember breakfast. Daniel stepped toward the bed. Grandma opened her eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she whispered, Daniel. This time, she had the right man. He sat beside her. I came back. Her eyes filled. I know. I broke my promise. Grandma shook her head. No, I did. Mark stood behind him. Grandma looked from father to son, then at me. Claire? Yes, Grandma. She reached for my hand, then Mark's. She placed our hands together. I'm sorry. I wanted answers. I wanted to ask why she had decided for everyone. Why she protected Mom instead of telling the truth. Why she let Mark grow up fatherless. Why she let me marry into a secret. But looking at her, I realized something painful. There are moments when getting an answer matters less than understanding its cost. Grandma had spent almost 40 years defending one decision. Now, when she had almost nothing left, she finally stopped defending it. Mark leaned close. Grandma, her eyes moved toward him, not Daniel. Mark, do you know who I am? She smiled. Of course. Then she said his name. Mark. It was the first time she had called him by his real name since her decline became severe. He started crying. So did I. Grandma died 11 days later. But that wasn't the end, because after her funeral, the attorney gave Mark an envelope she had left specifically for him. Inside was no money, no confession, just a photograph. It was from our wedding. Grandma stood between Mark and me. On the back, she had written, I spent my life believing family was who you protected. Mark taught me something better. Family is who you stop lying to, And underneath, Daniel was the man I sent away. Mark was the man who came back. Mark did not forgive Daniel immediately. That mattered. A reunion does not erase 39 missing birthdays. They started slowly. Coffee, phone calls, fishing once, although neither of them knew how to fish particularly well. Sometimes Mark came home angry. Sometimes Daniel canceled plans because shame was still easier for him than intimacy. But they kept trying. My mother told the truth to the rest of the family. Some forgave her, some didn't. She sold a piece of property she had inherited from Grandma and gave the equivalent value of the stolen money, adjusted generously, to a community program for families affected by gambling debt. It didn't erase what she had done. That was the point. Consequences aren't always about erasing. Sometimes they're about finally refusing to hide. As for me, I had to forgive something different. For several days, I had looked at my husband and wondered whether our marriage was built on a lie. It wasn't. Our families had lied. Our parents had hidden. Our grandparents had manipulated. But Mark and I had found each other without knowing any of it. That became strangely comforting. The ugliest secret in our family had accidentally produced something honest. And there was one final detail I didn't understand until months later. Grandma had called Mark Daniel only once before she died. The day this story began. At first, I thought it was confusion. Then, Mom found Grandma's old journal. Her final readable entry had been written the morning before our visit. My memory is leaving. I am afraid I will forget the truth before I have the courage to say it. If I see Mark, I must remember Daniel. Not because they are the same, because Mark deserves to know what we did to his father. Grandma had not mistaken my husband for another man. She had been trying to remember the secret. Daniel wasn't the wrong name. It was the last key she still had. And somehow, before her mind closed the door forever, she managed to hand it to us. I used to think family secrets survived because people were cruel. Now I think many survive for a more dangerous reason. Love. Grandma loved her daughter enough to destroy another family. Daniel loved my mother enough to accept blame that wasn't his. My mother loved the life she had built enough to stay silent. Mark loved me enough to hide questions about his own past because he feared what the answers might do to us. And I loved all of them enough to want one person to blame. There wasn't one. There were only frightened people making choices that seemed survivable in the moment and unbearable 39 years later. My grandmother spent most of her life believing that protecting someone meant keeping their worst mistake hidden. In the end, she understood that secrecy doesn't remove a debt. It only chooses who will pay it. My mother made the mistake. Daniel paid, Janet paid, Mark paid, Grandma paid, and eventually, so did I. The truth didn't repair everything. Mark never got his childhood back. Daniel never became the father he could have been. Grandma died, knowing some damage could not be undone. But the truth did one thing silence never could. It stopped the debt from passing to another generation. And now, whenever I remember that afternoon, Grandma gripping my husband's wrist and calling him by another man's name, I no longer hear the confusion of an old woman. I hear the last honest thing she was still able to give us, a name. If you were Mark, could you forgive Daniel for staying away for 39 years, even knowing why he did it? And what about Evelyn? Was she a grandmother protecting her pregnant daughter after a terrible mistake? Or did she cross an unforgivable line when she made an innocent man and his child pay the price? Most of all, if you were Claire, would you forgive your mother and grandmother after discovering they had known pieces of the truth for years? Tell me what you would have done in the comments.